Hey superstars, welcome to the Get Rich Without Being a Bitch podcast. I am Vanessa Shaw, your host for the journey that we're about to embark upon. Listen, if you're in business for yourself, you want to enjoy financial empowerment, live life on your terms, and frankly, live a much richer life, you are going to be in the right place because we are going to be challenging stereotypes, breaking through glass ceilings, giving you the tips, tools, and strategies that can help you be a better version of you, build life and business on your terms. So be sure to subscribe because you are not going to want to miss an episode. Go to your favorite podcast platforms on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe now. And I can't wait to start the journey with you. Hey, welcome back, superstars, to our latest episode of the podcast, Get Rich Without Being a Bitch. And I'm Vanessa Shaw, your host for this journey today. Oh gosh, as we dive into this one today, honestly, I feel uncomfortable. I'm going to be sharing something that feels quite vulnerable. And it's honestly not something I've shared with a lot of people. And so putting it out publicly on a platform like this definitely feels uncomfortable. And I feel like there's some really, really important messages for you here. And so I'm getting out of my own discomfort and focusing on how I believe this is going to be helpful for you, the listeners, and also some very important lessons learned from what I'm going to be sharing that we've been able to translate into our own business. So what am I talking about here today? I'm going to be talking about a $70,000 loss that I had in my business. It was about 10 years ago now. And it was after I made a $100,000 investment to work with a coach. Yes, I invested 6 figures to work with a coach one-on-one for a year. So let me dive into that. And I'm going to start right there. As I say, even as I notice my own discomfort coming up around this, I got really carried away, I guess perhaps is carried away in the whole growth mode in the coaching industry and the mindset of you've got to invest heavily to get to the next level. And when I look back on that now, in fact, I didn't have to wait this many years to look back on it. You know, there was a big bypassing some of my own inner knowing that happened back then and not tuning into my own wisdom. And I'm going to come back to that. But back then, I was fairly new in the States. I had a new business, right? I had closed down my business in Europe, which was, by the way, very, very different, a completely different business model to the one that I was starting in the States. It wasn't like it just translated across the pond, for those of you that know that expression. It was a complete shutdown. I was very much in the executive development world back in Europe. And I'd already started to work with some small business owners. And I knew that was the direction I was going. And when I landed in the States, I made the decision that I was really passionate about helping small business owners and not working with big corporations per se. So that was the shift I made. And back then, back in Europe, because I was working in big corporations, high leadership roles, my practice was probably 80 to 90% male. When I came to the States, this shift from big corporations to small business, male, and then to largely female, right? Women-owned businesses. So big shift. So it really is a new business in the States. I was probably doing about 180,000 in annual revenue. I had entered a coaching program that I was really loving. It was giving me like really amazing insights into mindset and sales and the places that I needed to shift. So there was just so much that I was learning. I was able to apply it. I was starting to get some results. I was a good member, let's say a good student in that program, in that I was taking what I was learning, I was applying it, I was evaluating, I was getting those results. And then I was invited into, an up-leveled program, which meant that I would be working one-on-one with the mentor. And I have to say, I was delighted. It was a massive ego stroke, right? The fact that I was invited felt very, very special. The fact that somebody thought, I was capable of like really taking my business to the next level. Again, felt really good. And what I probably didn't realize back then is that there was just a lot of ego that was for me being stroked and making that decision, right? From a place more of ego than practicality. So I made the decision. It felt very, very exciting. I actually had my husband on board with it. He believed in me as well. So I shared that with him and he said, no, I will do whatever I can to support you. But we were very clear. It was my investment. I was having to make it from my business. And if we just do the math, right, 180,000, probably somewhere like that in revenue. I did not have 100,000 sitting around in a bank account that I could just use. Let's be super, super clear, because I think everybody makes that assumption. I had very little. I was, again, very new in the States with a new business, and I was hustling, right? I was hustling to get it off the ground. So I make that investment and it feels really, really exciting. And the very first thing, this is interesting that this kicked in for me. And again, today I'm like, gosh, what was I thinking, Vanessa? But I want to share it from a very honest place in case this happens for you. I remember making that investment and somehow my mindset went into, let's call it magical thinking or delusional thinking even, that I'd made the investment and that magically my business was going to take off. Somehow I was like bypassing the fact that I now needed to not only make that big investment, but also put a lot of effort right into growing my business. For some reason that there was this gap there. No idea why. I think at times we have been marketed to that kind of like, we invest and then, miraculously things happen. At that point, I had bought into it. And a few months in, it's probably about month 3, I came to the huge realization that no, I actually really needed to step things up considerably more because I have monthly payments to make. I was, again, my own monthly revenues weren't considerably higher than the monthly payments I'm making. And remember, I, of course, would have had expenses in that business as well, different things that I was doing. And so I had to make these payments. Now, I think that was the really good part of this was knowing that I had to make those payments. And it was so important for me to be in integrity with making those payments on time, every time. I never once defaulted. For me, I was like, there's no way. I've stepped up to this level of investment. I'm going to be in integrity. I'm going to make sure that this happens. So there was never any question that I could default on it. And then what that meant is it gave me a sense of urgency to start to really focus on sales. And bearing in mind that this mentor as well was, again, really good, like as a very, very talented in mindset and sales, right? So I'm being very well supported there. Now, I was changing up my business model at the time. For some of you, if you're listening in, because I love it when I've got, clients today or people that I still see and they remember when I arrived new in the States. And I was hosting live events. That was my dream for my business back then. It was called the Big Bold Event. And I started my very first one actually here in Phoenix. I cannot remember now how many people came to that live event, but it's a lot of work, right? To rent the venue, to get all the things, the workbooks, the AV, the food and beverage, the outfits that I had to have. Back then I used to want to be, high heels on stage. It was like my power move. So, buying all these new things, makeup artists. I mean, it's a lot, and it's a lot of work to also fill events, right? And actually get the right people in the room. And I'm doing all of this pretty much solo at this point. I possibly had like a part-time VA helping, and I certainly had an event planner that I had hired. But I'm now in a place in the business where my expenses are escalating, right? And to put on this live event so that I can then make an offer to work with me. And as I say, some people will still remember coming to that live event very fondly. It was a really exciting time in the business. So here I am changing up the business model from something that I didn't know before. So I'm having to learn all these skill sets. My expenses are going sky high because when you run events, you have to pay for everything pretty much upfront. So it can be a lot of risk, hoping to fill the room and then hoping, well, I knew I was making an offer, but there's never ever any guarantee as to how many people will actually step into that offer and how many clients I would actually get from it. So anyway, that's the business model that I was in. And I started to get concerned about the expenses. And again, I had come from this mindset. It was very much prevailing in the coaching industry at the time. A lot of marketeers were, of course, conveniently sharing this message. You've got to invest. You have to invest. You've got to become that person. If you want to run $1 million business, you have got to be acting as if you're $1 million business owner. Well, the only problem is if you're acting as if you're $1 million business owner and you are taking on expenses as if you're $1 million business owner, but in reality, you're doing a fifth of that, like 200,000, it is going to end up messy, right? There's no way that that's going to end up the right way up. So I have my expenses that are escalating. And here was the thing, right? I knew something was up. And that was where I think I started to bypass my own inner knowing. I knew that the numbers intuitively, by the way, I wasn't looking at the numbers. Intuitively, though, I knew they were not adding up. And I started to get scared, right? Because the revenues were increasing. The revenues give us bragging rights, right? It's like vanity metrics. It can sound really great to be going, oh my gosh, like I've now hit $500,000. I'm running a $500,000 business, right? These are kind of nice, what I call sexy numbers to put out there. So they give us those bragging rights. For other people that don't run businesses, they can hear those numbers and just think, honestly, you've just got it made. But again, it's back to what are those expenses? Where's the profit? How much are you actually paying yourself? So the revenues are going up. That felt really exciting. I'm being praised and validated, right, for those revenues going up. And yet my inner knowing is saying something is up here. This doesn't add up. And I got too scared to look at those numbers. It was triggering all of my old money stuff to look at the numbers and to really see the truth. And I have to take responsibility for that. Now, I would have loved it had I been working with a coach back then that was like, let's sit down and actually look at them and like give me some education and start to make some different decisions. That wasn't part of that program. So I get to the end of the year. I have actually tripled my business. So tripled the revenues, which looked really great. And everyone's like, hey, Vanessa, amazing. And I had done a lot more sales. Again, great. But here was the other thing that also happened. When I started to look at the numbers and then I sat down with my accountant at the end of the year and we looked at the expenses, I hadn't been paying myself because of the expenses going so high. There was very little. Well, I say I hadn't been paying myself enough, right? Very little that was actually coming to me. And when we finally looked at those numbers at the end of the year, it was actually a $70,000 loss, right? So yes, the bragging rights were there. Those vanity metrics of tripling the business sounds really, really great. Okay. Profit gives us that sanity to know that we've got that cushion. There's something left over, something that we can invest, something that we could pay ourselves more with, pay our future more with. And ultimately, cash, right, is really the piece that gives us, total peace of mind. Got something to do with that. So I had bought into those vanity metrics at the expense of sanity, which was profit at this point in time. And again, I'm staring at a $70,000 loss. To say I felt demoralized would probably be an understatement. It was just one of those, like, how the heck did this happen? And I think there's a couple of things that are really important to say here. I bypassed my own inner wisdom, my own inner knowing, that hunch of something is up, and fear got in the way. Like my ego was still too big. Fear got in the way and stopped me course correcting, because the reality is I could have course corrected differently. The other thing was with the sales, and this is again a really, really important lesson. I've now got a sense of urgency to be fulfilling that commitment and that contract, and I was going to honor that come what may. And I'm super proud that I did, and I never, ever defaulted. But it also was to the cost of self. There was a lot of stress that was happening, and knowing that when we have to keep selling to meet financial obligations, it meant that I was overselling. So I had sold the wrong people into the programs, and it meant that I then ended up with attrition. Right? Everybody was sort of carried away. And again, it's back to today. And I'm sure you've experienced this as well. If you were constantly selling people into your world and into your programs, but then they're dropping off and you have to keep reselling, right? Something's up, right? Sometimes it's our delivery systems. Like we have to, increase our delivery. In our case, the delivery was really good, but we were just not a match for many of the people that had come into the business. We work better with not new stage business owners, but business owners that have been around for a while, because what we are doing is more advanced than just getting those first few clients, right? So expectations were mismatched, which meant I had attrition. And again, it's now harming the business, and I've got to keep selling more. So there were so many different lessons. It was definitely get the ego out of the way. Let's get back to being pragmatic. It started to teach me far more about numbers, understanding them, understanding where my own money story could come in and frankly start to derail me and the process. But here was the thing that I thought was a really fantastic example of how we were able to use this as a turnaround. First and foremost, of course, I benefited from that learning. We did go on to turn things around, right? Really, really great ways. But what it also taught me is that in the coaching world, and particularly in the business coaching world, there is so much emphasis put on revenue over profit and over the amount your business is paying you. And if we have somebody that is a very charismatic, powerful coach or mentor, right? Sometimes as women, I know that that's what was happening for me. I was losing my power. I wasn't standing in my power and sticking with the questions that I was asking and making sure that I got good responses, right? I was starting to feel intimidated. And it made me just look at what's going on in the industry. And from that day forward, I'm like, we have to include financial coaching in our programs. It's one of the reasons. It's one of the 9 growth accelerators in our program. It's incredibly important. I have a financial coach dedicated on the team because we start to see that women, just like myself, we were lacking in some of that financial education, that literacy, getting completely overwhelmed by the numbers, and then typically not looking at them, avoiding them, but then having those really, really painful moments where, working so hard, I'm hustling, it's the grind, I'm starting to feel burned out. That's exactly what happened for me at the end of that year. I was like, shoot, if I have to do this all over again, like why? It just felt, absolutely crazy. So I don't want that. I don't want that for my clients. I don't want that for the women that are listening into this podcast and are starting to become part of our community. And it's why today, yes, it feels really uncomfortable to share that story. I feel very embarrassed by it. There's still that, oh my gosh, did I really spend that money and invested? But when I actually look at how we've been able to use that to inform our coaching programs and the results now that our women are getting from working with us, honestly, it makes it all worthwhile. One of my clients the other day, and this was very, very spontaneous, she actually, I can't remember her term actually, it was something like she was making an introduction to somebody else that could benefit for our help. And in this email introduction, she'd said something like, Vanessa was like unapologetically the profit queen. When I worked with her, I was so burnt out. I was working all the hours, working into the nights. My team was burnt out as well. And she said, and in this last year, all of a sudden, we've increased profit by about 200,000. And she's unapologetic that profit is where it's at. And hearing those stories, and by the way, that same client is now gone to 4.5-hour work weeks for her and her team. And she said, my team is delighted, loves all the changes. We've got so much less stress in the business. And for me, when I hear those stories, that's what makes it worthwhile for me. That's why I want to share mine. So that, again, we have more women that are running profitable, enjoyable businesses, right? Where they're not burning out, really reaping the fruits of all of your hard work and being financially empowered. So, vulnerable story today. Have we turned things around? Absolutely. And have we let it inform all of our work now with the clients? Yes. So please let my lessons also be a lesson for you. You've definitely got to do the work to grow your business, but hopefully by hearing some of these stories, it just starts to shine the light on some places that you can look so that you are not having those painful big losses in your business and go into things with your eyes wider open than I did. Because regrettably back then, I didn't have somebody that I was having this type of conversation with. And as always, if you have enjoyed today's episode, please, please, please leave a 5-star review, a positive review. I'd love to hear from you. Give me a shout out. Let me know exactly what it is that you're loving so that I can do more for you. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button on your favorite platforms. That way you won't miss any episodes and you can catch us on all your favorite podcast platforms, on Spotify as well, and over on YouTube. Can't wait to see you soon, superstars.